Though the Marvel Universe is full of wonders and heroes, in the vast edges of the multiverse there exists an opposite dimension, a terrifying mirror, a world of ruins. Above California, in the oppressive heat of summer, an explosion tears across the sky. A Patriot missile launched by the US government reaches its mark with deadly accuracy as an Avengers Quinjet is ripped to shreds in the upper atmosphere. A lone reporter named Philip Sheldon stares at the horrifying scene from the ground. Lost, he thinks. I watch superhumans burn in the midday sun. My friends and family think I'm nuts, Philip would someday write. I've given up my photog job at the Daily Bugle for this. Philip spends his days traveling the dreary, hopeless American wasteland, collecting stories and piecing together the puzzle of how the superhumans fell. In this world, when the National Guard invaded California to put down a growing pro-secession movement, Stark, trying to meditate, got clipped by shrapnel from a National Guard grenade. It was then that Tony built his Iron Man exosuit. He saved himself with his technology, Philip writes. Became the man in the iron mask to the newspapers. But in this reality, Stark would use his newfound power to join with other great minds like Pym and Stephen Strange to form a revolutionary cell, the Avengers. Though Tony Stark and his newfound revolutionary group were armed with superhuman powers like none had ever seen before, the Guards stayed and secession from America became just another old idea. Philip remembers. Was that the last Quinjet? How many of them are still alive? He wonders, staring up into the burning ball of fire still hanging in the sky. It all went wrong. We were on the cusp of an age of marvels. I know it. But the possibility of an age of marvels had long since passed. The Avengers, far from the world-saving super team we all know, had led a revolt against the US, and America saw to it that the superhuman cell was destroyed with extreme prejudice. That's why I'm on the road, Philip says. All throughout this decade, people have been touched by the paranormal. Their stories must hold clues as to what should have happened. How did it all go so horribly wrong? Stopping in at a local watering hole, Phil orders a soft drink at the bar. A man clouded in shadows suddenly approaches him. "Buy me a drink or I'll kill you," the man sneers, but his intimidating demeanor shrinks away when the bartender laughs him off. He's just cranky. Got some kind of gross bone disease. Show the nice customer your hand, little Canuck. In another world, this man would be a great hero called the Wolverine. In this one, he's a drunken bum who holds his mangled hands up for Philip to see the scars running along his knuckles. In this warped reality, the Black Panther has been jailed, Clint Barton has been executed in the street, Wanda Maximoff pleads guilty and gives up her fellow Avengers to the state in return for immunity from prosecution. The government placed the Kree reservation here quite deliberately, Philip writes as he travels through the deserts of Nevada. Inside the camp, he sees dead and dying bodies of former Kree warriors. None of the children know why they're here, Philip says. He's come to interview the Kree spokesperson. But when he meets the alien, the radiation and cancerous growths that his body have been subjected to say all that needs to be said. "Mr. Sheldon," the Kree says, "please be seated. I am Mar-Vell. I understand you wish an interview." Philip sits. "Why did your invasion of Earth fail?" he asks, getting right to the point. Mar-Vell tells him the story of the attempted Kree invasion, how the Supreme Intelligence had ordered the Kree army to liberate the Earth from its overlords, how on their way to the planet they had seen the tangled remains of a silver spaceman floating through space disemboweled. The dead remains of the Silver Surfer have wreaked havoc upon the Kree warship's instruments, making them easy targets for the weapons of Earth. We had barely realized our visibility when your dirty nuclear projectiles detonated among us. Barely a tenth of us survived. Now, Philip witnessed the poisoned, horrible conditions that the survivors were doomed to live in. In Washington, D.C., the rarely seen President X presides over America's interests. "I hate this city," Philip writes of the nation's capital. "It's here that the American dream decided it liked the taste of the vomit it was choking on." On a street corner, one Nick Fury approaches Philip in secret. "People are starting to notice you, Sheldon," he says, threatening with a friendly tone. "You're making quite a stir. Been spotted in the two most security-sensitive areas in the country. I tell you, if we didn't know you were dying, we'd have had you locked up in California," Fury tells Sheldon. "I'm writing a book," Philip tells the man. "A book?" Fury says. Then, without warning, Nick Fury sucker punches Philip hard in the gut. "That's right. You stay down there. Fury spits on Philip as he lays in a puddle of his own blood. You don't understand, Philip begged Fury. It's them I'm writing about. Different ones. I contacted you because you knew Captain America. I ain't seen Captain America in a long, long time, Fury said, pulling his gun out and pointing it directly at Philip's skull. As Philip blubbers, trying to explain the intention behind his book, Fury pulls the trigger. Philip jumps, believing his life has just unceremoniously ended. But he opens his eyes to see a rabid dog behind him, killed by Fury's bullet. As Fury turns to leave, a woman approaches the two men. Excuse me, my name's Jean, she says, offering either of the men a favor for a few bucks. Nick Fury mercilessly guns the woman down in front of Philip's eyes. I gotta take a short nap now, Fury says, his eyes starting to radiate with insanity and dread. You just remember I'm clean, he tells Philip, putting the barrel of his gun beneath his chin. We killed America with a Patriot missile last week, Fury says, pulling the trigger and blowing his own brains out. Next, Philip heads to Chicago, where he hopes to speak with one Rick Jones. When Philip walked into the small, decrepit apartment, he saw that Rick lived a life of addiction and pain. You wrote to me about something that happened in Arizona, Phil asked Rick. Some kind of conspiracy. Rick took a swig of something bitter before he answered. Arizona. Huge patch of desert with nothing happening on it. Then I heard the bike. Rick's eyes glaze over as he's lost in the memory. This doctor in his white coat and everything was like ripping towards me. I was definitely gonna hit the guy. Coming to tell me I couldn't sit there. Jeez. Then the water tower started to spark. Rick remembered the doctor reaching him, pushing him into the trench to save him from the incoming explosion. He screams at me. It's a bomb! Rick could only watch as the doctor took the full brunt of the detonation's blast right before his eyes. But it didn't kill him. Not really. It hurt to look at him. His skin went black and dry and cracked, and light shone out of him like all his meat was on fire. Then he started to swell. Rick may be one of the only people still alive to have seen the creation of this world's Hulk, and the sight haunted him for the rest of his days. He just turned into a mass of this cancer, and he was still alive, man. I could see it. They keep him in a vault under a lake now, codename Hulk. Man, you ask the CIA. Having heard Rick Jones' story, Phil walks out. Outside, a man with a skeleton painted onto his shirt lies dead in the street, 3 bullets through his chest. Phil keeps walking. Death is everywhere, Phil writes. It's falling on us all. Let me find an answer before I go. Let me show them all how this happened. Please don't let me die in this place. Sitting on a plane, Philip Sheldon turns to the passenger beside him. Excuse me? Hello? He says. Miss Darkholme, wasn't it? Excuse me? The woman beside him claws at her hands and her eyes scream with fear. No. She starts to cry, her skin roiling. She loses all control eventually, deteriorating into a husk of roiling skin and bone. They called her a shapeshifter, Phil writes, and said that being so many people in a short space of time gave her a multiple personality disorder. Philip exits the plane. On the tarmac, a protester stands, arms crossed, staring at the police escorting the body off the plane. The government guy shoves that hippie. Phil watches. And I hear the sound of breaking glass and metal. A contraption hidden beneath the hippie's trench coat breaks as the government goon shoves the bystander. Bomb! Bomb! The CIA operative yells. People dash for cover, screams go up from the crowd. Afterwards, a specialist told me the weird machinery around the hippie wasn't a bomb, but some homemade degaussing kit to suppress magnetic fields. The hippie falls to his knees. Metal is screeching and groaning as it's pushed and pulled. People too close to the man who would have been known as Magneto are slowly killed as the iron in their veins is pulled from their bodies. Finally, the man loses all control. Afterwards, the entire tarmac is nothing but a tangle of twisted metal. Some, the lucky ones, survive. Philip Sheldon is among them. Next, Philip travels to Texas. A prison warden by the name of Wilson Fisk walks him through the cell block. Inside each, a prisoner devoid of hope, doomed to terrible treatment for the rest of their days. This here's the Summers boy, Fisk tells Phil, a sickening glee in his voice. Incinerated his family with his eyes. Had to blind the boy to get them eye beams under control. They move to the next cell. Take little Kitty here. She does this intangible thing. But the last time she tried escaping, she got solid again in the cell door. Lost 3 feet on testing. Phil witnesses a person with blue skin, stripped as if they were monsters. He sees a man with his arms and legs removed to prevent him from moving at super speeds. Deep in the middle of nowhere, Philip attends a so-called freak show. He stays for the main event, a stunt motorcyclist who goes by Blaze. In the dead of night, Philip watches as a man pours lighter fluid over his head and puts a lighter to his face. This was the last time Blaze did this stunt, Phil writes. For hours after this shot, he rode around the desert, screaming. Technically dead, but still riding. It's not just one thing, Philip reflects from a hotel room in New Orleans. It all went wrong. I thought I might find a single mistake, a single accident that led to it all. I can't explain it. The best I can do is to show people what things could have been like. Phil falls, exhausted, onto the bed. I'm so tired. And the worst is yet to come. Phil's next destination is high in the Rocky Mountains. He comes seeking a man named Ben Grimm. I know you don't appreciate visitors, Major. I'm Phil Sheldon, from the Bugle. Phil starts, but the man across from him gets straight to it. All right, Mr. Sheldon. You got me. I'm Ben Grimm. You want the story? Get comfortable, the man says in a gruff, earthy tone. While Phil listened, Ben launched into his tale of woe. I was getting into engineering at the Cape, lecturing at the local university there too. That's how I met Reed Richards and the Storm Kids. Ben recalled for Sheldon how Reed Richards was interested in Astraea, the link between the orbital capsules I used to ride and the Apollo moonshots that follow. Reed's aspirations were high, but his intentions were even more impressive. Richards wanted to study cosmic ray activity in local space, something orbitals would never reach. The rocket, though, was taking considerable time to build, and as Ben remembered it, Richards didn't want to wait. One rainy night, Reed had come to Ben's house, having worked himself into a frenzy. He wanted to steal Astraea, Ben told Phil. Show him all that red tape was anti-science. Wanted me to fly the ship for him. The conversation turned ugly fast. We had a fight. I decked him, Ben said, his eyes staring at something far off. I told him I wanted to put the lateral motors on Astraea. It'd take months just for the math. She wasn't ready. Ben looked right at Phil. The stupid bastard didn't hear a word I was saying. Reed talked some 10-year hound from the facility called Von Doom into flying Astraea, and they stole her, yeah. As he talked, Ben pulled some old photos from a file. Bodies, broken and brutalized, lay in the grass. They went up into a flash storm of cosmic radiation. Ben gestured to one of the images. This picture? That's the Storm Boy. The first one we found when Astraea came down. Boy caught fire at a cellular level, burned from the bones outward. Another picture showed a woman who seemed only partially tangible. That's his sister, Ben said. When the recovery team arrived, she was invisible, light reflective. Made her eyes light reflective too, so she was actually blind. Von Doom? Ben said, looking down. I never got any photos. They said he was animal when he went up, and mineral when he came down. They say he was wearing his internal organs on the outside. Then, Ben's bright blue eyes came up to meet Phil's gaze. They were almost swimming with tears. You know what the worst of it is? Despite having no laterals, despite the flash storm, I can't help thinking it would have been different if I'd flown her. Can't help it. Finally, with all his research finished, Phil returned to New York City. I have all the notes, all the interviews, he thought to himself. I can write the book. And please, God, I can write it quickly. In the heat of the New York summer, Phil brings a hand up to his forehead. Deep, painful scars crisscross his skin like some sort of web. I wish I had time to really craft the book. Make the clearest and best possible case of why the world went wrong, he thinks. That weasel kid Parker stole that time from me. Walking through the streets, Phil can't help but notice how weak he feels. Ran out of pills on the train back. Have to stop at the pharmacist later. Then his mind turns back to the young photographer he used to work with. Parker. Peter Parker. I always hated him. Lousy photographer. Worked freelance for the Bugle, paying for his college tuition and keeping that poisonous old aunt of his. Kid messed up a college experiment. Got bitten by a spider he'd irradiated. Got infected. Rattled with a raging mutant virus. Got infectious. Visited the Bugle offices before his rash showed. The moment that Phil shook hands with the infected Peter Parker flashes briefly through his mind. Contagious little weasel, he thought to himself. Suddenly, as his attention turned back to the present, Phil realized he couldn't breathe. He struggled to breathe. He choked and sputtered as the tendrils of the virus continued to climb from his hands to his neck and face. In the heat of the city, Phil Sheldon doubled over, his suitcase clattering to the ground. The illness he'd been desperately fighting finally overtook him. As the man fell, dead before his head even hit the pavement, the photos and notes he'd spent his life collecting were dashed into the wind. The book he'd spent so long hoping he could write, the book that could set the story straight, died with him on that summer afternoon.